Today we're meeting with Raul Gutierrez, CEO and founder of Tinybop. Tinybop's a company that makes iPad games for kids. We're gonna go by their offices, check them out, then swing over to Red Lantern Bicycles, talk a little bit more, and then hopefully go for a ride.
Hi, how are you? Welcome
So this is the
Tinybop.
place, huh?
Yep, this is
Excellent.
This is the spot, and we wanted to just have an open space so that everybody can all work together out here. And then we needed to have a conference room also, just so that we could, work on projects. And
this is cool.
This is where, like, we need to crunch on a project or figure something out. Post-it notes are like our key.
Agile.
Yeah, exactly.
This is great. You have a lot of Macs.
Yes, we have a lot of Macs. We make iOS apps, but actually, even if we were doing Android, you'd still do it all on Mac. We're at a core creative studio, and so that's our tool. I've collected children's books my whole life, and so.
Have you really?
Yeah, I have.
Since you were a child, right?
Since I was a child, but I was a guy in college who had like children's books in my college room, which didn't always go over well. I wanted to always have reference, and then also serve as a point of inspiration.
Do you bring kids into the office?
All the time, yeah. So we test all our apps with kids in the office, and we try to go to schools, and I'm the guy at the birthday party, like trying to get the kids to play the apps, and so yeah, we test a lot.
Oh, that's cool. The hail in the cab.
Only outside of New York is that considered anything.
Exactly. So, why did you choose this area of Brooklyn?
We were in Dumbo, which is this area right. The acronym means down under Manhattan Bridge, and Dumbo is like one of the hot tech areas here. There's over 80 startups in that one tiny little area.
Really?
But the prices have also been going way, way up, and so we wanted to be close to there. We also wanted to be close to where everybody lived. So we had 20 people. We mapped where everybody lived on a map. And we said, okay, what's kind of the center of it? And it ended up being here.
So let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
Where did you grow up?
I was born in Mexico, and I grew up mainly in Lufkin, Texas.
Okay.
And Lufkin is this tiny town in East Texas. I always describe it as an island surrounded by trees instead of water.
Interesting.
When I grew up there was, way pre-internet. There was one channel on television. They had Farm and Ranch News with Horace McLean. There wasn't a lot of outlet to the outside world.
Interesting. Was tech part of growing up? Did you have a computer? Or?
My dad, at some point, got an Apple II computer for his office, and then I started spending a lot of time at the office playing with the Apple II. And eventually we got one at home, and I was just hooked. I started, you had to build your own games back then.
Yep.
And so I would make my own games, and I learned to program, and eventually I started selling, little programs.
Really?
Yeah, and there was sort of the early version of the internet with BBSs, and so that was my outlet. I would connect to other people, like by there were these 1-800 numbers that you could get that were sort of quasi, I'm sure not legal, but you could dial these 1-800 numbers and then dial into somebody else's BBS, because it was a long distance call, and long distance was expensive.
Yes.
In the 80s. Anyway, I was an Apple II guy, and then later on, when the Mac came out when I was in high school, and I was one of the very first Mac developers. My version of Inside Mac was Xeroxed, and had handwritten additions in it, and I had some friends who were developers who got a Lisa, and they programmed one of the first shrink wrap Mac games, and I was tangentially involved in
So you were already kind of playing around in this game world early on. Even earlier, but before that, like toys as a kid. So I have 5 kids, and I've experienced kids and their relationships with toys are very different. So the oldest, my stepson, likes human toys, meaning, that's what my wife always says, meaning that he likes interaction with people instead of a toy.
Right.
My 10-year-old loves like collecting things, like even has all my old G.I. Joe guys, right? And he likes to collect them and put them up and really can play by himself with those toys. And it seems like kids are very different on how they play through. What types of toys did you play with? And
I had, compared to today's childhood, it was like fairly sparse in terms of the number of toys I had. My parents were really good about giving me tools. So I had, like, my dad's Pentax camera was, by the time I was 7, I was sort of obsessed with it. I was taking a lot of pictures with the camera. I made Super 8 movies. And that I was not supposed to play with. But like my parents would go out of town. It was back in the era when your parents would go on vacation alone. They'd leave you at home, and we'd stay with our grandmother or something.
Yeah.
And so we would sneak the camera, and I don't even remember how we bought film, but we would make these little movies, and we made these elaborate, our version of Star Wars, or I was really into stop motion, so I did these very, very elaborate stop motion movies. And more so than any toy that you played with, like those were, I was really, like, I love these tools that you can make things with.
Yeah.
And then we would build stuff. Like, I lived out in the woods, so we built tree houses, and we had this elaborate, very, very elaborate set of tree houses that connected to each other.
So right all along, you were already, early on, you were engineering and using creativity.
I like to make stuff,
Yeah.
I think my childhood had a lot of boredom.
Yeah.
Which I think modern childhood, it's something that's missing in a lot of modern childhoods.
Yep.
And, we would go out and do stuff. And out of that boredom came we had these elaborate games that we would play where we would sort of pretend to be deers and dogs, or cops and robbers, or whatever it was, but it was all in the woods, and it was all sort of running around. It was a childhood that was mainly outdoors. I would get home from school, and my parents, I'd finish my homework, and they'd say, like, get out of the house, and I would come back when it got dark.
Yep.
But the other toys I loved were just like blocks. Like, for me, blocks were always the best toys.
Yep.
They're the best toys for my kids. My oldest kid is 10 now, and still the wooden blocks are, like, often brought out, and they'll sort of make some.
He's a creator.
Something. I hope so. I hope so.
Did you go to college? Did you go to school after?
Yeah, so I went to Lufkin High School in Lufkin, Texas, which was the local school, which is not known as being kind of the best school system, but I had these very dedicated parents who were always kind of tutoring us and bringing people in to teach us things. So I learned about engineering from this guy named Joe Bird, who developed the Mark II, which is that oil pump that sort of goes up and down.
Okay.
And he was retired at the time, and just like an amazing teacher. And I learned about art from this woman named Mrs. Shepard, who was she was a painter and the daughter of a riverboat captain, and she grew up in Faulkner's neighborhood, and Faulkner, like, taught her how to drink when she was 18. And I think because of that, and partially because of the computer stuff, I got into Princeton.
Okay.
And so I went to Princeton as an electrical engineer, but I graduated with a degree in art history. And it wasn't because I abandoned the engineering, it was just because I was always a little right brain, left brain.
Okay. What work did you do before you started Tinybop?
I've done many things. Like,
Okay.
my career is not sort of a standard career. I've always worked. I've worked since I was a kid. I've always had businesses. I used to write software. I used to cut grass. I used to make museum displays, like when I was in high school, for our local museum. In college, after college, I was supposed to go to China, but because of Tiananmen Square, I couldn't go. And I landed in a a law firm job that I hated.
Okay.
And I had some stuff happen in my life. I lost like my mom and my brother, and I spent like 2 years traveling around the world. And after I came out of that, I ended up in Hollywood. And it wasn't any plan. It was just that I had a couple of friends who were there. And just out of luck, on my second day there, I got a job with Scott Rudin, who's a very well-known producer. And so, like right away, I was like working at Paramount and you know, going through the Paramount gates every day, which was pretty awesome.
What kind of roles did you play within Hollywood?
I started as the lowliest assistant. And this was an office that had like a hierarchy of assistants of you know, I think there were 7 when I started. And the lowliest assistant had to do just like these very humble jobs. But little by little, I worked my way up. Not necessarily through good work, but often through attrition, because it was a job in which a lot of people got fired.
Yeah.
And eventually, I was sort of like his right-hand guy, traveling around. You know, we were working on 5 movies at any given time, and then also Broadway plays. And so, you know, I was on the set from beginning to end.
Yep.
And I think the first movie I worked on was Clueless, and the last movie I worked on was The Truman Show.
Okay.
So I was there for a little bit of a span. And even though it was a long period of time in my life, I learned a lot, because each movie is like a little startup. You start with an idea, you have to develop it, you hire a bunch of people, you have to make the thing, you have to sell the thing.
Yep. And you do that over and over again.
And you do it over and over again. I didn't necessarily realize it when I was there, but I learned an awful lot. I learned a lot about managing people, etc. And when I left that, because I sort of burned out on the hours, I started doing computer stuff again and was building websites for movie studios. Okay. So it was still relatively early on in the web.
Yep.
Studios were just discovering that this was like a good channel. And the most important thing that I did is I connected analytics to the website.
Okay.
And we found that a site could be predictive of how a movie would open. So there was a little like cheerleading movie that I worked on called Bring It On. And we went to the studio and we said, this movie's going to open much bigger than you think it is.
And you knew that from the amount of people that were coming to that website, right?
We saw crazy, well, this is 1998 traffic, but it was like crazy traffic for that era. And so we said, you know, you really should develop, you know, put more resources into this, because this is going to be huge. I said, no, you know, Kirsten Dunst, she's a child actress, and Eliza Dushku is, you know, she's been on television, but like we know how much they're worth in the marketplace, and it's so the movie I think was expected to open at like 4 or 5 million, and it opened at more than 20, and went on to make over $100 million. And so it was
that your first kind of case study to the analytics behind?
Well, it was a thing that then suddenly the studios were like, this guy knows something, which you know, wasn't any rocket science, but it was. I knew something a little more than what they knew at the time, and so. Eventually, that led to me working on much bigger web properties, and you know, I worked on the Terminator movies and things like that, in which you would have like a pretty big budget to build like a real property out. But the problem was that the studios always just looked at this as marketing, and once the movie was out, they would just abandon it. So you'd build this thing, and you'd build an audience, and then it would just go away. Yeah. And eventually all that work went in-house and it became part of the studios. Okay. I never really wanted to work at a big company. So
is that where Tinybop came to
No, then after that, I continued to do sort of all sorts of web stuff for people and consulting, web consulting stuff. Here I worked on a startup that was my first like proper startup. Okay. It was this a website that sold art online. It's called 20 by 200. Okay. And I was there from the idea phase, and we sort of built that up into a pretty good business. And then eventually I left that. And when I left that, I knew I wanted to do my own thing. I'd worked for other people for a long time, and I knew that I wanted to be in mobile also, because I'd been around the block from the beginning of computers, basically, or the home computers. And it seemed to me that the world was going this way, and it was just a tidal wave that was happening. And so I wasn't really I gave myself a year. I put myself in a co-working space, and I just had a list of ideas that I was going through. None of them actually had anything to do with kids things. And it was in the middle of that year that one of my kids came to me, and he was about to have a birthday party. I think it was a kindergarten birthday party. He asked me if he could trade his birthday party for an iPhone. And if you know anything about kindergartners, like the birthday party is pretty much like the centerpiece of that year.
Yeah.
And not
That's
only
the most important thing for a kid is having that birthday party, right?
That's it, yeah. And so not only was he willing to sell out all his friends, but it was his favorite toy. And that moment really made me stop. And it made me, not so much as a business thing, I just wanted to understand it as a parent.
Yeah.
Because I, as a parent, had a sort of troubled relationship with screen time. I felt like it was sort of keeping kids away from parents and from that sort of interaction.
The woods.
It's keeping away from the woods. They're not building things. Felt like they were just consuming. So I wanted to understand it. And so I went through and I really started tracking everything he was doing. And I downloaded the top 100 kids and educational apps. And I played with them. And at the end of that, I think I realized that the form, it's just a tool. It's a tool like those tools that I used to have. It's no different really than the camera or a Super 8. In fact, it's both of those things. But it was also all these other things. And there were very few people in the kids world creating kids content that I thought were deserving of my kids' attention. There were a lot of things that were really disposable and that were just essentially trying to stimulate them into some sort of game loop that involved them buying more coins, and it's like a monkey pressing. And I want to do the opposite of that. Kids nowadays don't have the woods. Even if they live in the woods, they probably don't go out in the woods in the way that we used to.
Yep.
I wanted to create a set of apps that would allow them to sort of explore the world and maybe understand a little bit more about the world, and to bring up questions in kids to drive them closer to their parents. And so out of that, the first series that we developed called the Explorers Library came up, and these are big subjects that every kid everywhere needs to know about.
Yep.
So the human body, plants, the earth. We have weather coming out. Space is on there. What's great is that we start each of these apps by asking, what does a kid know about the subject? How has it been taught in the past? And you find out that kids actually don't know that much. Most 6-year-olds don't know that there's a tube that connects their mouth and the other end.
Yeah.
It's some sort of weird magic. They don't understand that. And when you reveal that, they suddenly understand something about themselves that's really important. And the feedback we get from parents constantly is, oh, my kid's actually asking all these great questions.
Yeah.
And so it's not something that drives kids away from parents. It actually drives them towards them.
Your first app was which one?
Our first app was Human Body, and it sort of set the template for this Explorers Library series.
Okay.
Well, the original sort of inspiration was those old dictionaries or encyclopedias that had the transparencies of the body, and we thought, wouldn't it be cool if we could do that and then bring it to life? And all of our apps are what we call explorable explanations.
Okay.
So it's they're not really a game in the traditional sense. It's simulation.
Okay.
So feed the body. Food goes in one end, comes out the other end. Feed it too much, it'll throw up. Feed it something fizzy and it might burp. We also use the device a lot. So you can. The eyeball, the camera is a proxy for the eyeball, and so we show how the image is projected on the back of the eye and how the eye, dilates and all that stuff.
What I really noticed recently is the games that are really successful and the ones that my kids enjoy the most are replications of things I used to play with as a kid. I was watching my daughter and son play Minecraft the other day, and I looked at it and I said, you know what? This is Legos.
Right.
You guys are playing Legos, And not new Legos, because this is old Legos where you build whatever you want to build, versus I believe you told me one day is Legos today are like toys that have been pulled apart. And you're
I think, I mean, so our second series is called the Digital Toys. And basically that was built on my frustration with modern Legos. So modern Legos, like to my mind, are these disassembled toys. They teach kids to follow instructions. You get to a single endpoint. It's the opposite of creativity.
Yeah,
so like
it's the opposite of what Legos were originally, right?
It's the opposite of what they were
You get
originally.
all these pieces and you build whatever you want to build.
Originally, you have a bunch of blocks, and your parents would, or you would just have a context and say, I want to build a space station or a zoo or whatever, and then you just build it. That's in the sort of term of art in the education community is a sandbox app.
Yep.
You have a bunch of things and you make things. So our second series is basically that idea. So each of them is a set of parts and a context. So the first app in that series is a robot factory. So we give you a whole bunch of robot parts. You have, spider legs and human legs and like different kinds of faces and heads. And we're not telling you how to put them together. Kids putting it together. And at the end of it, the output of that series is that the kid's telling you a story. Like the story is the output. So it's giving the kid agency. It also means it's something they'll play over and over again because they're building this collection of characters that like lives in their imagination.
Are they problem solving? Or are they just building?
There's a little bit of problem solving in that there's a world that you can put your robot into, and let's say that you have spider legs and you have like a million spider legs all around, your robot might just sort of go into a circle and die. So we have like different obstacles in the world, but it's very low impact. It's not like we want the kid just to play and have fun, and so it's. Yes, if you build a very bad robot, your robot will fall over and die.
And then you'll learn something from that, right?
And then you learn, and then you can rebuild it. But we're not like taking away points or anything.
Yeah.
And so that app has only been out a couple of months, but kids have already built 7 million robots with that app, like little virtual robots that exist out there in the world.
What was one of the big first milestones for the company?
Well, I mean, with getting the first app out, was a sort of pretty colossal task. At the beginning, we were only 4 people. And I think our goal for the first month was 10,000 downloads. And we had 8,000 downloads in the first day. So, that was sort of one milestone. And then eventually you get to 1 million downloads. And, now we're sort of in the many millions of downloads. But, that first... Like, we didn't know if it was going to work at the beginning. The App Store is this amazing distribution platform.
Yeah.
And you can hit a button and reach everywhere in the world. And we're heavily localized. We're in 50, 60 languages. When we hit that button the first time, we didn't know, like, if it was going to connect. And I think we got back the numbers on the first day, and we had said that there were 3 downloads. And I was like, we're sunk. I got to do something else.
That sounds like a rough day.
Yeah, and we've made made $6. And then I noticed that those 3 downloads were like in the last seconds, like they had just gotten under the wire of the last seconds of the day.
Okay.
And so the actual number for that first day was like 8,000 downloads, which is it's pretty good. And
That's
then,
awesome.
And then we've done other things, like we did this thing called Free App of the Week with Apple, where we gave the app away for free. I said, what can we expect from this? And I said, well, maybe if you do well, you'll get like 100,000. Really well, you get 300,000 downloads during the week. On the first day, we had 800,000 downloads.
Oh, wow.
And over the week, we had like 4 point whatever million.
What's been like the largest challenge as a company with Tinybop? Like, what is the thing that you struggled with maybe for the longest period of time that you think you might have solved now?
Discovery is always a challenge, like having people find you and sort of understand what you are.
Discovery within the App Store?
Discovery within the App Store is a huge challenge because, you're up there with a million other apps. A lot of those other apps are like, big company marketing something, or they're things that, built by a single guy, gotten his app up. And so there's like very little differentiation in terms of quality.
You're all on the same platform.
You're all on the same platform,
Yeah.
and there's very little sort of weight. And there are things that sort of we've risen above in that, you get like Editor's Choice, and our robot app got iPad App of the Year for last year. So there are things like that kind of differentiate you a little bit. But ultimately for us, it's really been about this sort of slow building a brand, having a parent trust you because they bought one of your apps and their kids was asking good questions, or kids building something with the other app. And so that means that each time that we put out an app, people buy into the system more. And so it wasn't sort of one particular lightning bolt. It's just been this like long, hard slog. But it means that every time we put out something new, we have a higher and higher amplitude opening. We have more people coming into the system. It also means our sort of in-between numbers, our everyday numbers, are higher because of that.
So you solved it with resilience and just continued going at it, right?
I mean, yeah, with just sort of walking carefully over the glass, What
do you think? What do you think the challenges will be 5 to 10 years out in this space?
I think for me, the sort of interesting thing that's happening is that we're getting to a point where basically every adult on Earth is going to have a smartphone.
Yep.
Very soon after that, there's going to be virtually every kid will have a phone because they'll get all the hand-me-downs.
Yep.
So our goal is really to reach everywhere. Like you can buy all of our apps. Like we have right now 8 apps, next week 9, for like $20. And that's the product of 20 people working very hard, and researchers doing a ton of research, and like artists doing a ton of. It's essentially the entire K through 6 curriculum of science you can grab for this very low cost, much like cheaper than even a single picture book. And so I think our challenge will be getting this thing that we've made and pushing it out everywhere. Like we're already in many other countries. Already more than half our sales come from other countries, but we could still go much further.
Changing gears a little bit, if you were to look back at your 25-year-old self, knowing what you know now and enjoying the work that you're doing today, what advice would you give your 25-year-old self?
I've been asked that a couple of times. My path has never been linear.
Yep.
And I'm a fairly resilient person, and I'm somebody that I've always enjoyed the projects that I've done. But I think the advice that I would give myself and to anybody that's in that phase of their life is that to build equity in yourself, because there were many things that I did in which I was building equity in other people, and in which other people were sort of taking credit for something that was a lot of my work, and not to take away of what other people are doing.
Sure.
But to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. And I think when you look for a job, like we try to do this in our company, we try to make sure that the people in the office are known for the work that they're doing. And we know that because of that, we will lose good people. But if you create an environment where the best people want to come with you because they can grow, then you have a really healthy place to work.
Excellent. What do you do outside of work? Do you have a passion that separates you from your day-to-day work?
The funny thing is I've sort of melded a lot of the things I love in the work. I mean, I do a lot of photography. I'm sort of known a little bit online as a photographer. I used to have a very popular photo blog.
Okay.
And I still do that. All the stuff that I used to love to do when I was a kid, stop motion and all that stuff, a lot of that I kind of do with my work now.
Yeah.
But I also do a version of it with my own kids. And I think the big difference with kids these days is when I was a kid, my parents would say, go out in the woods, and you're on your own. now the kids really expect you to play with them. And it's really fun for us. But I do also want them to be bored sometimes and to have time when I'm not sort of giving them the context and they're sort of coming up with things. And with my own kids, it is funny because they both have like these sort of unique interests that are moving beyond the stuff that I'm interested in. But that's my most fun thing, is to do creative projects with my kids.
So I have one final question, and the question is, looking back, has there been some advice that someone gave you that helped guide you through your journey, and that maybe still helps you today?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for me, one of the things that was really powerful in my life was hanging out with my grandfather. So my grandfather was a shoemaker and loan shark in Mexico. And I used to travel around with him, and he used to collect all the things he needed to make shoes, and leather, and there was like dyes and, you know, different parts and things. He, at the same time, was doing his loan shark business, in which he was sort of maybe collecting somebody's ring as collateral and so on. And he would bring me along, and I was, you know, like little. And sometimes when he was doing the loan sharking, you know, there would be these emotional scenes where and he was always incredibly kind to people. And it was not the type of loan shark that was going to break anybody's leg.
Yeah.
It was just like, well, he was going to have your wedding ring, like if you didn't pay him back.
Yeah.
And he was always kind to them. And I think even when people were not necessarily being sort of nice to him back. And he always told me that if you were kind to everybody, and if you try to do that, then people always think well of you. And that it'll make your business easier. And I don't know if that's like sort of an overriding principle, but I try to do that. I try to do that in my company, and
That's great. Well, thanks for being kind and being on our show.
Hey, this is Jeff Martin again. If you go to leadbychange.com, you can see this show and other shows. If you subscribe, you can get early access to new shows and also exclusive content. Thanks for watching.